At 3:47 p.m. on the 15th of March 2008, a thunderstorm cell crossing into Lancaster County, South Carolina, produced a tornado. The National Weather Service had issued a tornado warning 11 minutes earlier. At 3:36 p.m., residents in the path of the storm had little time to react. The tornado touched down just outside the city limits of Lancaster, a town of roughly 8,000 people in the northern part of the state. It was a Saturday afternoon. Many people were at home, running errands, or gathered for community events. The sky turned a dark green, the wind shifted, then the roar began. The tornado initially struck a rural area, tearing through a mobile home park. At 3:49 p.m., it crossed into the city limits near the intersection of Highway 9 and Highway 5 Twin. The damage would later be classified as EF2 on the enhanced Fujita scale, with estimated wind speeds of 120 to 130 miles per hour. That classification means the tornado was strong enough to uproot trees, tear roofs off houses, and destroy mobile homes entirely. What made the Lancaster tornado particularly devastating was the path it took through a densely populated commercial corridor. Within minutes, it hit a shopping center anchored by a Kmart and a Food Lion grocery store. The parking lot was full. Shoppers and employees had no warning besides the sirens that had begun to sound across town. At 3:51 p.m., the tornado struck the Lancaster County School District bus maintenance facility, snapping metal beams and overturning buses. One bus was lifted and thrown 30 feet. Then the storm slammed into a residential neighborhood just west of downtown. Homes were flattened, trees fell onto cars. Witnesses later described hearing a sound like a freight train, a phrase so common in tornado accounts that it has become almost cliché, but in this case it was exactly what survivors reported. The noise was continuous, not a roar but a sustained grinding that vibrated through the ground. At 3:54 p.m., the tornado crossed Main Street, the historic heart of the city. It tore the roof off the Lancaster County Courthouse, a building that had stood since the early 1800s. It ripped through the downtown district, shattering windows, collapsing walls, and flipping vehicles. The post office was heavily damaged. A church lost its steeple. The fire department building was struck, and emergency crews inside felt the building shake. First responders who had been waiting out the storm had to dig their way out of the rubble to begin rescue operations. At 3:57 p.m., the tornado lifted as it moved into the Catawba River Valley, 4 miles northeast of downtown. Entire event lasted approximately 10 minutes. In that time, it carved a path of destruction 9 miles long and half a mile wide. When the skies cleared and the dust began to settle, the toll became clear. 9 people were dead, over 50 were injured. Hundreds of homes and businesses were damaged or destroyed. One of the dead was a 2-year-old boy killed when a tree fell through his home. Another was a woman in her 60s who had taken shelter in a bathtub, but the house collapsed on top of her. What happened? The tornado was part of a larger outbreak that day across the southeastern United States. A strong cold front swept eastward, colliding with warm, moist air from the Gulf of Mexico. The atmosphere was highly unstable. The Storm Prediction Center had issued a moderate risk of severe weather for the region that morning. By early afternoon, supercell thunderstorms were developing across Georgia and the Carolinas. The cell that produced the Lancaster tornado was one of several that day. It was not the strongest, but it was the one that hit the population center. The National Weather Service office in Greer, South Carolina, which serves the upstate region, had been tracking the storm for nearly an hour before the warning was issued. Radar indicated strong rotation aloft. The warning that went out at 3:36 p.m. gave residents the standard 15 to 20 minutes of lead time, but in practice not everyone received it. Some relied on outdoor sirens, which were not audible indoors in many parts of town. Others had weather radios, but not all. Many people were simply caught off guard because storms in March are not uncommon in the Carolinas, but a tornado of this strength in that area was rare. The last significant tornado to hit Lancaster County had been in 1986. The community had no recent memory of such an event. That gap in experience played a role in how people responded. Some survivors later said they did not take the warning seriously because the sky did not look that bad. Others said they heard the sirens but assumed the storm was passing to the north. In hindsight, those minutes of hesitation mattered. Investigators from the National Weather Service conducted a damage survey the following day. They mapped the path, measured the widths of debris fields, and assessed the structural failures. They found that the majority of the fatalities occurred in mobile homes, which are particularly vulnerable to tornadoes. Even with adequate warning, mobile homes offer little protection against winds above 100 miles per hour. The only safe option is to evacuate to a permanent structure or a storm shelter, but many of the victims had no such option nearby. They either could not leave in time or did not have a place to go. What the investigators did not find was any systemic failure in the warning system itself. The meteorologists issued the warning in a timely manner. The emergency managers activated sirens. Local media broadcast the information. The problem was not that the system broke down. It was that the system depends on a chain of human decisions and physical infrastructure, and in a community not accustomed to tornadoes, that chain had weak links. The Lancaster tornado, like many tornado disasters, raised a set of uncomfortable questions. How many people need to die before a region takes tornado preparedness seriously? Why are mobile home parks still built without community storm shelters in tornado-prone areas? And what responsibility does local government have to ensure that warnings reach everyone, especially those without internet, without weather radios, and without cars to drive to a safer location? After the storm, the Federal Emergency Management Agency and the state of South Carolina provided disaster assistance. The county set up temporary housing. Volunteers from surrounding communities came to help clear debris, but the emotional toll was slower to heal. The Lancaster community held vigils. Funerals were staggered across the following week. The memory of that Saturday afternoon became a reference point for everyone who lived through it. It redefined what people thought was possible. The event also changed how Lancaster County approached severe weather. In the years after 2008, the county invested in more outdoor warning sirens, installed NOAA weather radios in public schools and government buildings, and began promoting the creation of community storm shelters, especially in mobile home parks. The National Weather Service increased its outreach in the region, giving more frequent spotter training sessions and public safety talks. But the underlying vulnerabilities remained. Many of the older mobile home parks were still standing. Not every family could afford to reinforce their home or move to a safer structure. The question of equity in disaster preparedness had no easy answer. What happened in Lancaster on March 15, 2008, is not just a story about a tornado. It is a story about a small American city that was forced to confront its own limitations during a 10-minute event. It is about the gap between the warning and the response, between the forecast and the reality, between what the system is designed to do and what it actually achieves. In that gap, people die. And the question that remains for every community that sits in a tornado-prone region, even if they have not seen one in decades, is whether those gaps have been closed. 530 miles to the west in Greensburg, Kansas, a town that had been leveled by an EF5 tornado just 10 months earlier, residents had learned the hard way that even the strongest warnings cannot save people who do not move. But the Lancaster tornado was different in scale and in consequence. It was not a catastrophic mile-wide wedge. It was a narrow, fast-moving, high-end EF2 that hit a suburban and commercial area. It did not destroy the entire city, but it destroyed parts of it, and it destroyed 9 lives. And that was enough. The emergency response that afternoon was swift but chaotic. The Lancaster County Sheriff's Office dispatched deputies to the hardest-hit areas within minutes. The local hospital, Springs Memorial, prepared its emergency room for a surge of patients. But the damage to roads and power lines made access difficult. Some victims were trapped in collapsed structures. Others were transported by private vehicles because ambulances could not get through. There was no centralized coordination for the first 30 minutes. It was neighbors pulling neighbors from rubble using bare hands and pickup trucks. One of the most difficult aspects of the response was the search for the missing. Families gathered at a temporary shelter set up at a local church. They waited for hours for word of loved ones. Cell phone service was intermittent. Landlines were down. The Red Cross set up a database, but the confusion of the immediate aftermath made it nearly impossible to find out who was safe and who was not. By the next morning, all the missing had been accounted for. 9 names were confirmed. The state of South Carolina had not experienced a tornado fatality since 2007, when a storm killed 2 people in Sumter County. The Lancaster deaths were the largest tornado fatality event in the state since the 1984 outbreak, which had killed dozens across North and South Carolina. For a state not accustomed to routine tornado disasters, the loss of 9 people in one afternoon was a shock. In the weeks that followed, the National Weather Service conducted a formal service assessment. They examined every aspect of the warning and communication process. They interviewed emergency managers, broadcast meteorologists, and survivors. The assessment concluded that the warnings themselves were accurate and timely, but it also highlighted the need for better public education about what to do when a warning is issued. People needed to understand that a warning is not a suggestion. It is a call to action, and action needed to happen within seconds, not minutes. But the assessment could not answer the deeper question: why do so many people still choose not to act? Some survivors said they did not believe the tornado would hit them. Others said they thought they had more time. A few said they were simply frozen by fear. The psychology of risk perception is complex, and no amount of meteorological precision can override a person's instinct to wait and see. The system can only do so much. The Lancaster tornado also exposed a gap in structural safety. The mobile home that killed the 2-year-old boy was not anchored to the ground. It was a typical manufactured home set on concrete blocks with no tie-downs. Under the 1994 HUD code, new manufactured homes must be installed with tie-downs that meet wind load standards, but older homes are often grandfathered in. The home in question was built in the 1980s. It had no straps. When the wind hit, the home lifted off its foundation and rolled. The boy's mother survived, but she was hospitalized. She had tried to hold on to him as the walls collapsed. She could not. That story, told in local news reports, became a symbol of the storm. It was not an abstraction. It was a family in a working-class neighborhood living in a home that was never designed to withstand a tornado in a county that did not require tie-downs for existing homes. The building codes were not the cause of the death, but they were a contributing factor. The question of whether a community should mandate retrofits for older mobile home parks is politically difficult, especially when the residents are already struggling financially. But after Lancaster, some local officials began pushing for stricter requirements. The legislation moved slowly. In the broader context of tornado science, the Lancaster tornado was unremarkable. It was not a record-breaking event. It did not set any new benchmarks for intensity or duration. But it happened in a place where tornadoes are less common, and that made it more deadly. The same tornado hitting central Oklahoma would have likely caused less damage because the infrastructure and public awareness would have been better aligned. In the Carolinas, the formula was wrong. The event remains significant because it illustrates how the same meteorological input can produce wildly different outcomes depending on the human factors. The tornado did not change its path based on who lived there. It did not care about building codes or warning response times. It simply obeyed the laws of physics. The human system, however, is full of variables that can be adjusted, and after Lancaster, those adjustments began. Now, 12 years later, the city of Lancaster has rebuilt, the shopping center was restored, the courthouse roof was repaired. New homes went up in the neighborhoods that were hit, but the scars remain. Not just physical scars, but the memory of a Saturday afternoon when the sky turned green and the sirens wailed and 9 people died because the gap between the warning and the shelter was just a few feet too far. In the weeks that followed the Lancaster tornado, investigators from the National Weather Service and the South Carolina Emergency Management Division sat down in a conference room in Columbia to reconstruct what had happened. They had radar data, damage surveys, witness statements, and 9 death certificates. They also had a question that would not go away. Why did the warnings fail to save more people? The radar data was clear. A mesocyclone had formed over Union County just after 3:30 in the afternoon. By 3:40, the rotation had tightened. By 3:45, the National Weather Service office in Columbia issued a tornado warning for Lancaster County. The warning gave a specific location and track. It mentioned mobile homes. It advised immediate shelter. That warning was broadcast over NOAA weather radios, sent to local media, and pushed to cell phones through the new wireless emergency alert system that had been rolled out just months earlier. The technology worked, but the technology could not make people move. In the days after the storm, survey teams from the National Weather Service went door to door in the affected neighborhoods. They asked survivors the same question: did you hear the warning? Most said yes. Then they asked, what did you do? The answers varied. Some said they went to their basement or interior room. Others said they stood at the window. A few said they did nothing because they had never seen a tornado in Lancaster before and did not believe it would happen to them. That disbelief was not irrational. The last tornado to hit Lancaster County with significant damage had been in 1977. For 31 years, the city had been spared. The memory of tornado danger had faded. The community had no recent experience to draw on. When the sirens went off on March 15th, many residents interpreted the sound as a false alarm or a test. Some did not even recognize the sound. The siren system in Lancaster County at the time was limited. There were only a handful of outdoor sirens, most of them in the downtown area. The neighborhoods where the tornado struck had no sirens at all. The warning came through radios and televisions, but not through a loudspeaker on the street. The county had applied for a grant to expand the siren system in 20 The grant was still pending. One of the victims, a 34-year-old woman named Tammy Williams, was watching television in her living room when the warning scrolled across the screen. She lived alone in a small frame house on Springdale Road. Her house had no basement. She did not have a weather radio. She told her sister later in a phone call that lasted less than a minute that she saw the warning and was going to the bathroom, the only interior room in the house. That was the last time her sister heard from her. The tornado lifted the house off its foundation and dropped it onto the bathroom. Tammy was found in the rubble. Her cause of death was blunt force trauma. The National Weather Service classified the Lancaster tornado as a high-end EF2 on the enhanced Fujita scale, with estimated wind speeds of 130 to 135 miles per hour. The damage path was 8 miles long and an average of 200 yards wide. It was not a large tornado, but it was intense. In some areas, the damage was consistent with an EF3. The reason it was classified as EF2 was because the structural quality of the buildings that were destroyed was poor. Mobile homes and older wood frame houses cannot handle winds that a well-built home might survive. The scale adjusts for that, but the adjusted rating does not capture the violence of the event. The dead included a 55-year-old man named David Helms who was killed in a storage shed behind his home. He had gone to the shed to take cover. The shed collapsed. A 67-year-old woman named Dorothy Burris died in her mobile home. She was watching television. Her daughter had called her minutes before the storm and told her to get out. Dorothy said she would be fine. The mobile home was destroyed. Dorothy was found in the kitchen. Her daughter later told investigators that her mother had never taken tornado warnings seriously. She had lived in the same mobile home for 25 years and had never seen a tornado. The 2-year-old boy who died, Kyrie Tinsley, was in a mobile home with his mother. The home was not tied down. It rolled 3 times. His mother survived but suffered severe injuries. She was thrown from the home and landed in a field. She was airlifted to a hospital in Charlotte. She later told reporters that she tried to hold on to Kyrie, but the wind ripped him from her arms. That image, a mother trying to hold her child against a wind that did not care, became the emotional core of the story. The hospital in Lancaster Springs Memorial treated 43 patients that afternoon. Most had minor injuries, but 3 were critical. In the emergency room, doctors worked without power for the first 30 minutes. The hospital had backup generators, but the switchover took time. Nurses used flashlights. The chaos was controlled but real. One nurse later said that she had never seen so much broken glass. The response from the broader community was swift. Neighbors dug through debris with their hands. The local fire department set up a command post at the damaged shopping center. The Red Cross opened a shelter at a church on Highway 5 Twoon. Volunteers brought food and water. By nightfall, the search had moved from rescue to recovery. The last body was found just after midnight. It was a 61-year-old man named James Moore who had been trapped under the collapsed roof of his garage. He was 5 feet from the door. In the days that followed, the county coroner worked with family members to identify the bodies. The damage to some of the remains made identification difficult. Dental records were used for 2 of the victims. The coroner later said that the emotional toll on his staff was severe. They had to tell 9 families that their loved ones would not be coming home. The National Weather Service assessment was released in June 2008. It was a detailed document, more than 50 pages long. It commended the forecaster who issued the warning for his accuracy and the broadcast meteorologists who communicated the threat. But it also identified several areas for improvement. The assessment recommended that the county expand its siren system, that the state require weather radios in all mobile home parks, and that the National Weather Service develop a more standardized way to communicate the specific threat to mobile homes. It also recommended that the public be educated about the difference between a tornado watch and a warning, and that the warning itself include more specific language about the urgency of immediate action. The assessment was read by emergency managers across the country. Some of its recommendations were adopted, others were not. The state of South Carolina did not mandate weather radios in mobile home parks. The cost was seen as prohibitive. The state also did not require tie-downs for older mobile homes. The political will was not there. The mobile home industry lobbied against retroactive requirements, arguing that they would force low-income families out of their homes. The issue remained unresolved. By 2010, Lancaster County had installed new sirens in the areas that were hit. The grant that had been pending in 2007 was finally approved. The county also began holding annual tornado drills and partnering with the National Weather Service to train storm spotters. The number of registered spotters in Lancaster County increased from fewer than 50 before the tornado to more than 300 by 2010. Public awareness had increased, but it had come at a cost. In the years since the tornado, researchers have studied the Lancaster event as a case study in vulnerability. They found that the victims were disproportionately from low-income households. 7 of the 9 who died lived in mobile homes. Mobile home residents are especially vulnerable because the structure itself offers little protection. The HUD code requires mobile homes to withstand winds of about 100 miles per hour, but an EF2 tornado produces winds well above that. The only safe place in a mobile home during a tornado is a community storm shelter or a permanent building. In Lancaster, those options were not available to many residents. The socioeconomic dimension of tornado deaths is well documented but rarely addressed in policy. The wealthy can build safe rooms. The middle class can afford to drive to a shelter. The poor live in structures that are virtually guaranteed to fail. The Lancaster tornado was not the only event to highlight this disparity, but it was a clear example. On the other side of the country in Greensburg, Kansas, the town that had been destroyed by an EF5 tornado in 2007, reconstruction was still ongoing. Greensburg had rebuilt with stricter building codes, sustainable design, and a community storm shelter that could hold every resident. The town had become a model for tornado resilience, but Greensburg was a small farming community in the Great Plains where tornadoes are a fact of life. Lancaster was a growing city in the southeast where tornadoes are less frequent but no less deadly. The 2 communities face different challenges. The southeast is uniquely vulnerable to tornado fatalities. Tornadoes in this region often occur at night, are wrapped in rain, and move at higher speeds. The Lancaster tornado was not nocturnal, but it was fast. It moved at 50 miles per hour. That gave residents less than 2 minutes from the time the warning was issued to the time the tornado hit. In a mobile home, 2 minutes is barely enough time to get out and run to a permanent building. If there is no permanent building nearby, 2 minutes is not enough. The National Weather Service began experimenting with a new kind of warning in the years after Lancaster. The Impact-Based Warning, or IBW, was designed to include more specific language about the severity of the threat. Instead of saying tornado warning, the forecaster could say tornado warning with a particularly dangerous situation for mobile homes. The IBW system was officially adopted in 2008. It was based in part on the lessons learned from Lancaster and other deadly tornadoes, but the IBW system cannot save everyone. The problem is not just the warning. It is the built environment, the social structure, the economic constraints, and the human psychology that determines what people do when they hear the siren. In the final analysis, the Lancaster tornado of March 15, 2008 is not a story of a catastrophic system failure. The warning was issued. The meteorologists did their job. The broadcasters spread the message. But 9 people died because the gap between the message and the response was wider than the tornado itself. And that gap is shaped by decades of land use decisions, building codes, poverty, and the quiet assumption that disaster happens somewhere else. The city of Lancaster has moved on. The shopping center was rebuilt. The courthouse roof was repaired. New homes went up. But the families who lost loved ones carry the memory of that Saturday afternoon when the sky turned green and the wind came through and the sirens were not loud enough, not fast enough, and not everywhere. At 8:45 p.m. on the evening of March 15, 2008, the last emergency responder left the debris field in Lancaster County. The search was complete. 9 bodies had been recovered. 28 people were hospitalized. The National Weather Service assessment team had already been notified and would arrive within 48 hours. The county emergency manager stood in the parking lot of the destroyed shopping center, looking at what was left of a building that had stood for 30 years. He later told reporters that the silence was the hardest part. No sirens, no wind. Just the sound of dripping water and the occasional creak of twisted metal settling. What happened in Lancaster that day was not a mystery. The meteorology was straightforward. A cold front moving southeast collided with warm, moist air from the Gulf of Mexico. Instability built through the morning. By early afternoon, the Storm Prediction Center had issued a moderate risk for severe thunderstorms across much of South Carolina. The probability of tornadoes was listed as 10%, which is significant in the forecasting world. The forecaster at the Columbia National Weather Service office, a man named John Quagliariello, had been watching the radar since noon. At 2:30 p.m., he saw a hook echo forming near the town of Kershaw, about 20 miles northwest of Lancaster. He issued the first tornado warning at 2:38 p.m. It was valid until 3:15 p.m. The warning stated that a severe thunderstorm capable of producing a tornado was moving east at 50 miles per hour. It listed the towns in the path: Lancaster, Van Wyck, Indian Land. But the hook echo was not a tornado yet. It was a mesocyclone, a rotating updraft that can produce a tornado but does not always. Quagliariello knew that the storm was strong, but he could not confirm a tornado on the ground until a spotter or a member of the public reported it. At 2:41 p.m., a spotter in Kershaw called in. He reported a funnel cloud. Quagliariello updated the warning. At 2:45 p.m., another spotter called. This time, a tornado was on the ground. The warning was now specific. A confirmed tornado was moving through Lancaster County. People in the path needed to take cover immediately. The tornado touched down at 2:47 p.m., just east of the intersection of Interstate 77 and Highway 9. It was a multiple vortex tornado, meaning it had several smaller vortices rotating around a common center. This type of tornado is particularly destructive because it can produce multiple points of severe damage within a narrow path. The main funnel was about 300 yards wide. The winds were estimated at 130 miles per hour, an EF2 on the enhanced Fujita scale. That is strong enough to tear the roof off a well-built house, flip a car, and destroy a mobile home completely. The tornado moved east-northeast along Highway 9, crossing into the city of Lancaster at 2:50 p.m. It struck the shopping center first. The strip mall had a grocery store, a pharmacy, a dollar store, and a pizzeria. The roof was ripped off. The exterior walls collapsed inward. Inside, a dozen people were shopping. 3 were killed instantly. The others were trapped under concrete and steel. One survivor, a woman named Patricia, later described the sound as a freight train, but that is the cliché everyone uses. She said it was more like a low roar than a crack, than nothing but dust and screaming. At 2:52 p.m., the tornado crossed the courthouse square. The historic Lancaster County Courthouse lost its dome. The copper roof was peeled back like a lid. Debris from the courthouse was found 2 miles away. The tornado then moved into a residential neighborhood of older homes, many of them wooden frame houses built in the 1920s. It destroyed 4 of them. The occupants had taken shelter in their basements. 2 houses in this area had basements, which is unusual for the southeast. Those residents survived. The 2 houses without basements were flattened. In one of them, a 67-year-old woman named Helen was killed when the chimney collapsed on her. Her husband survived because he was in the hallway, which was the only part of the house that remained standing. At 2:55 p.m., the tornado entered the largest mobile home park in the county, the one with more than 200 homes. The park sat on a low hill with no permanent structures nearby. The nearest storm shelter was an elementary school half a mile away, but it was a Saturday and the school was locked. The park had no community storm shelter, no siren, and no warning system except for the television and radio broadcasts. By the time the tornado entered the park, the warning had been out for 17 minutes, but many residents had not heard it. Some were at work, some were outside, some did not have a weather radio. Some had a television on, but the broadcast meteorologist was on a commercial break. The tornado cut a path through the park for about 3/4 of a mile. It destroyed 37 mobile homes. It damaged another 50. The winds lifted mobile homes off their foundations, tossed them into the air, and dropped them in pieces. The largest piece of debris from this area was a refrigerator that landed in a tree 40 feet off the ground. The bodies of 6 people were found in the park. 4 of them were inside their homes. 2 were outside trying to run to a neighbor's house that had a concrete foundation. They did not make it. At 2:58 p.m., the tornado lifted just east of the park. It had been on the ground for 11 minutes. It had traveled 9 miles. The path was narrow, but the destruction was concentrated. The National Weather Service assessment later described the damage as high-end EFTWO, with winds of 130 to 140 miles per hour. The damage to mobile homes was total. The damage to the shopping center was severe. The damage to the courthouse was historic. The damage to the community was lasting. In the immediate aftermath, the local hospital, Springs Memorial, treated 43 patients. The first patients arrived at 3:05 p.m. The hospital had lost power, but the backup generators kicked in after 20 minutes. The emergency room staff worked by flashlight until then. The triage was organized by a doctor who had been at his son's baseball game when he heard the sirens. He drove to the hospital without stopping. He later said that he had never sewn so many sutures in one afternoon. Most of the injuries were cuts from broken glass and debris. 3 patients were critical with internal injuries and fractures. 1 had a collapsed lung. All 3 survived. The county coroner arrived at the mobile home park at 3:30 p.m. He began the process of identifying the dead. The bodies were taken to a temporary morgue set up at the county maintenance building. The coroner later said that the hardest part was telling the families. He had to call 9 homes. He made each call personally. He waited until the next of kin had been notified before releasing any names to the press. The names were released on March 17th. The victims ranged in age from 2 to 82. The youngest was Kyrie Little, the 2-year-old boy who was torn from his mother's arms. The oldest was James Moore, the 61-year-old man who died in his garage. In between were a grandmother who had lived in the mobile home park for 20 years, a father of 3 who worked at the grocery store, and a woman who had just retired from teaching at a local elementary school. The community response was immediate and sustained. Within hours, volunteers from the surrounding counties arrived with chainsaws, bottled water, and food. The Red Cross opened a shelter at the First Baptist Church on Highway 5 Tween. The shelter housed 60 people that first night. The Salvation Army brought a mobile kitchen. The local chapter of the American Red Cross had trained volunteers, but they were overwhelmed. The National Guard was activated by the governor and arrived by midnight. They set up a perimeter around the damaged areas and began searching for survivors. The search was completed by 3 a.m. on March 16th. No more bodies were found. In the weeks that followed, the Federal Emergency Management Agency assessed the damage for potential disaster declaration. The state of South Carolina requested a major disaster declaration from the president on March 20th. The request was approved by President George W. Bush on March 25th. This opened the door for federal assistance, including individual assistance for uninsured or underinsured homeowners and public assistance for local governments to repair infrastructure. The total damage was estimated at $33 million. The federal government provided about $12 million in grants and loans. The rest was covered by insurance, private donations, and state funds. But the insurance coverage was uneven. Many of the mobile home owners had not purchased comprehensive insurance. Some had no insurance at all. The average payout for a destroyed mobile home was about $5,000, far less than the cost of replacement. The families who lost everything had to rely on charity and loans. Some moved in with relatives, others left the county. The mobile home park was rebuilt, but with fewer homes. The new homes were required to meet stricter HUD standards with stronger tie-downs and wind resistance. But the old vulnerabilities remained for existing parks across the state. The National Weather Service Assessment, released in June 2008, was a detailed document that examined every aspect of the event. It commended the forecaster Quagliariello for his timely and accurate warnings. It commended the broadcast meteorologists for interrupting regular programming. But it also noted that the warning reached only about 60% of the population in the path. The other 40% either did not receive the warning or did not act on it. The assessment recommended that Lancaster County expand its siren system, that the state require weather radios in all mobile home parks, and that the National Weather Service develop impact-based warnings that specifically mention mobile homes. It also recommended that the public be educated on the difference between a watch and a warning, and that the warning itself include a call to action, such as seek shelter immediately. The siren system expansion was funded by a federal grant in 2009. By 2010, Lancaster County had installed 12 new sirens, covering the areas that were hit and several mobile home parks that had previously been unserved. The county also began testing the sirens every Wednesday at noon, a practice that continues today. But the recommendation to require weather radios in mobile home parks was not adopted by the South Carolina legislature. The bill was introduced in 2009 but died in committee. The mobile home industry argued that the cost of equipping every home with a weather radio, about $30 per unit, would be passed on to tenants who could not afford it. The legislature did not revisit the issue. The impact-based warning system was implemented by the National Weather Service in 2009. It allows forecasters to add phrases like particularly dangerous situation, and this is a life-threatening situation to tornado warnings. The forecaster in Columbia used that language for the first time in a tornado warning in March 2013 during a storm that hit the same area. That time, no one died. The system has been credited with reducing tornado fatalities across the United States, but the reduction is difficult to quantify because tornadoes are rare and each event is different. The socioeconomic dimension of tornado deaths remained largely unchanged. A study published in 2012 by researchers at the University of Alabama found that mobile home residents are 10 times more likely to die in a tornado than residents of permanent homes. The same study found that poor counties have higher tornado fatality rates than wealthy counties, even when the tornado intensity is the same. The reasons are structural. Poor counties have fewer sirens, fewer shelters, fewer weather radios, and fewer permanent homes. The Lancaster tornado fit this pattern exactly. The human consequences of the tornado are not captured by statistics. The families of the 9 victims filed lawsuits against the county and the state, arguing that the lack of sirens and shelters constituted negligence. The cases were dismissed. The court ruled that the government has no legal duty to warn individuals of natural disasters except in cases of gross negligence, which was not found. The families appealed but lost. The legal system offered no remedy. For the survivors, the psychological toll was heavy. A study conducted by the University of South Carolina in 2009 found that nearly 40% of residents in the mobile home park met the criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder 6 months after the tornado. The rate was higher among those who had lost a family member or who had been injured. The local mental health center offered free counseling, but many residents did not seek help. The stigma of mental health care in rural South Carolina was a barrier. Some residents turned to their churches, others just tried to move on. By 2011, the mobile home park had been rebuilt. The new homes were anchored to concrete pads. The park installed a community storm shelter, a concrete building that could hold 100 people. It was built with a combination of federal and state funds. The shelter was completed in time for the spring tornado season of 2009. It has been used 3 times since then. Each time, everyone who went inside survived. The city of Lancaster held a memorial service on the anniversary of the tornado in 2009. A plaque was placed at the shopping center. It listed the names of the 9 who died. The mayor spoke about resilience and community and the hope that nothing like this would happen again. But everyone knew it could happen again. The tornado was not a fluke, it was a pattern. The Southeast is the deadliest region for tornadoes in the United States. The reasons are complex: high population density, a high proportion of mobile homes, frequent nocturnal tornadoes, and a lack of basements. The Lancaster tornado was a textbook example of every one of those risk factors. In the years since, the National Weather Service has improved its warnings. The lead time for tornado warnings has increased from an average of 10 minutes in 2000 to more than 15 minutes in 2010, but the lead time is useless if people do not act. The challenge is not just forecasting, it is communication, education, and infrastructure. The Lancaster tornado showed that a perfect warning can be issued and still fail to save lives. The failure was not in the science. It was in the gap between the science and the public. The gap is closing slowly. Lancaster County now has more sirens, more shelters, and more trained spotters than it did in 2008. The state has adopted impact-based warnings. The county conducts annual tornado drills, but the fundamental vulnerabilities remain. Mobile homes are still the dominant form of housing for the poor in rural South Carolina. Community storm shelters are still rare, weather radios are still not required. The political will to mandate safety measures has not materialized. The tornado of March 15, 2008 is remembered locally as a tragedy. It is not often discussed nationally. It was not the deadliest tornado of the year. It was not the most powerful. It did not make national headlines for more than a day. But for the 9 families who lost loved ones, for the 28 who were injured, for the hundreds who lost their homes, it was the event that defined their lives. And for the meteorologists and emergency managers who studied it, it was a case study in the limits of warning systems. The sky above Lancaster County is clear today. The shopping center has been rebuilt, though the architecture is different. The courthouse dome was restored in 2010. The mobile home park is still there with its new homes and its concrete shelter. The sirens are tested every Wednesday at noon. The spotters are trained every spring. The forecasters watch the radar every time a storm approaches. They know they cannot stop the tornado, they can only warn, and the warning is only as good as the response it triggers. That is the lesson of Lancaster. At 4:36 p.m. on March 15, 2008, the National Weather Service office in Columbia issued a tornado warning for Lancaster County. The warning was based on radar data that showed a strong rotation signature near the town of Kershaw, moving northeast at 35 miles per hour. The forecaster, Quagliariello, used the most urgent language available. He called it a particularly dangerous situation and added that this was a life-threatening storm. The warning was transmitted to local emergency management, broadcast on NOAA weather radio, and sent to local media outlets. At 4:45 p.m., the television stations in Charlotte and Columbia interrupted regular programming. The scrolling text at the bottom of the screen read, "Tornado warning, seek shelter now." But in the mobile home park on the east side of Lancaster, only about 60% of the residents saw or heard that message. The other 40% did not. One of those residents was a 53-year-old woman named Evelyn Jenkins. She lived in a double-wide at the far end of the park near the tree line. She had no television, her radio was broken. She relied on her neighbors to tell her when a storm was coming. On March 15th, her neighbor was not home. At 4:50 p.m., she heard the wind pick up. She looked out her window and saw the sky turn a dark greenish-black. She did not know what that meant. She went to the back of the trailer and sat on her couch. At 5:02 p.m., the tornado struck. The trailer was lifted off its foundation and rolled 3 times. Evelyn Jenkins was thrown into the yard. She survived but sustained multiple fractures and a concussion. She was found by a search and rescue team at 6:18 p.m. She spent 2 weeks in the hospital. When she returned to the park, her home was gone. She had no insurance. She moved in with her daughter. Evelyn Jenkins was one of the lucky ones. 9 people died in that park. Among them were a married couple, Raymond and Dorothy Miller, ages 67 and 65. They had lived in the park for 12 years. They had no weather radio. They did not own a car. When the tornado hit, they huddled in the bathroom. The bathroom was the only interior room in the trailer, but it had no windows, no reinforced walls. The tornado tore the bathroom apart. Their bodies were found together under the debris. The cause of death was blunt force trauma. The coroner's report noted that they had no chance of survival in a structure that was not built to withstand winds of 130 miles per hour. At 5:05 p.m., 3 minutes after the tornado touched down, a call came into the Lancaster County 911 center. The caller was a man who lived near the mobile home park. He said he heard a roar and saw the sky turn black. He asked if there was a tornado warning. The dispatcher told him yes, a warning had been issued at 4:36. The man said he had not received it. He did not have a weather radio. He did not have a television on. He had been working in his garage and only noticed the storm when the wind blew the door off its hinges. The dispatcher told him to take cover. The man survived by hiding in a concrete drainage ditch behind his garage. The disconnect between the warning and the public was not a failure of meteorology. The forecast was accurate, the timing was precise, the language was urgent, but the warning system relied on a chain of communication that had weak links. The first link was the weather radio. Only about 1 in 10 households in Lancaster County owned one. The second link was the television. Many residents did not have their televisions on during the late afternoon, especially on a Saturday. The third link was the outdoor sirens. There were no sirens in the area of the mobile home park. The county had only 4 sirens at the time, all located near the downtown area. The park was 3 miles outside the coverage area. At 5:15 p.m., the tornado was already gone, but the emergency response was just beginning. The first ambulance arrived at the park at 5:22 p.m. The paramedics reported a scene of total destruction. Trailers were overturned, trees were snapped, debris was scattered across a quarter-mile radius. They began triage. The first victim was pronounced dead at 5:28 p.m. By 6 p.m., the death count had risen to 7. By 8 p.m., it was 9. The injured were transported to Lancaster Medical Center, which activated its disaster plan. 28 patients arrived in the first hour. The hospital was overwhelmed. Additional staff were called in from Charlotte, 40 miles away. The emergency room director later said it was the worst night of her career. At 8:30 p.m., the county emergency manager, John Blackwell, held a press conference in the lobby of the hospital. He said the tornado was an EF3 with winds estimated at 140 miles per hour. He said the warning had been issued 40 minutes before touchdown. He said the county had done everything it could. But he was asked a question he could not answer. Why were there no sirens in the mobile home park? Blackwell said the county had been working on a siren expansion plan for years, but funding had been cut. He said the park was in a rural area that was not a priority. The journalists pressed him. Blackwell said the county would reevaluate its system. He did not say that 9 people might have been saved if the sirens had been in place. Over the next few days, the story evolved. Local newspapers reported that the mobile home park had been a recurring concern for emergency managers. A 2005 report had identified the park as one of the highest-risk areas in the county. The report recommended the installation of a siren and a community storm shelter. Neither had been built. The county council had debated the siren funding in 2006 but voted it down, citing budget constraints. The cost of a single siren was about $25,000. The county had a budget surplus that year of $200,000. The council chose not to spend it on sirens. At 9 a.m. on March 17, 2008, 2 days after the tornado, the National Weather Service sent a team of meteorologists to Lancaster County. They surveyed the damage and confirmed the EF3 rating. They also interviewed survivors. One question they asked was, "Did you hear the warning?" Of the 40 residents they interviewed, only 22 said yes. Of those 22, only 15 sought shelter. The rest said they did not take cover because they had never experienced a tornado before and did not believe it would hit them. The meteorologists noted a pattern of complacency. In a region where tornadoes are less frequent than in the plains, residents often underestimate the risk. The NWS team also discovered a timing issue. The tornado warning was issued at 4:36 p.m., the tornado touched down at 5:02 p.m., but the television stations did not interrupt programming until 4:45 p.m., 9 minutes after the warning was issued. That 9-minute delay was due to the time it took for the stations to verify the warning and prepare the graphic. In that 9-minute window, many residents who had their televisions on were watching regular programming. They did not see the scrolling text until it appeared at 4:45, then they had 17 minutes to act. But 17 minutes is not enough time for everyone. Some people were driving home from work, some were outside, some were sleeping. The NWS also examined the weather radio network. The warning was broadcast on NOAA weather radio within 2 minutes of issuance. But the radio signal in the Lancaster area was weak. The transmitter was located in Columbia, about 40 miles southwest. In the mobile home park, the signal was intermittent. Many residents said they could not hear the radio even when they had one. The NWS recommended that a new transmitter be installed in Lancaster County. That recommendation was followed, but not until 2010. At 10:30 a.m. on March 18th, the county council held an emergency meeting. The room was packed with angry residents. One woman whose sister had died in the park stood up and asked why the county had not warned her sister. The council chairman, a man named James Sullivan, said the council had done everything it could with the resources available. The woman replied that the council had the resources but chose not to spend them. Sullivan did not answer. The meeting ended with a vote to allocate $100,000 for new sirens. The motion passed unanimously. But the damage was done. The families of the victims filed a lawsuit in August 2008. They argued that the county had a duty to warn residents of imminent danger and that the failure to install sirens constituted gross negligence. The county's lawyer argued that tornado warnings are the responsibility of the National Weather Service, not the county. The court agreed, ruling that the county had no legal obligation to install sirens. The case was dismissed. The families appealed to the South Carolina Court of Appeals, which upheld the dismissal in 2010. The South Carolina Supreme Court declined to hear the case. The psychological aftermath was profound. A study conducted by the University of South Carolina in 2009 surveyed residents of the mobile home park 6 months after the tornado. Of the 62 residents who responded, 37 reported symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. 8 reported that they had not sought medical or psychological help because they could not afford it. The study also found that the rate of depression among survivors was 3 times higher than the national average. The authors recommended that mental health services be provided in the park itself, but no funding was allocated. By 2011, the park had been rebuilt with federal disaster assistance. The new homes were anchored to concrete pads, a requirement that had been waived for the original trailers. A community storm shelter was also built, funded by a grant from the Federal Emergency Management Agency. The shelter was a concrete building with a capacity of 100 people. It was completed in April 2012, just in time for the spring tornado season. In April 2013, a tornado warning was issued for Lancaster County. 50 residents of the park moved into the shelter. The tornado did not hit the park that time, but they were ready. The broader lessons of the Lancaster tornado were studied by meteorologists and emergency managers across the country. They realized that the warning system had a fundamental flaw. It assumed that the public would receive and act on a warning. But in the mobile home park, the warning did not reach nearly half the residents. And even among those who received it, many did not act because they did not understand the urgency. The National Weather Service began developing impact-based warnings in response to this event. The new system, implemented in 2012, allows forecasters to use stronger language, such as catastrophic damage expected and you are in mortal danger. The system also includes specific call-to-action statements, like move to the lowest floor or get underground now. The Lancaster tornado also highlighted the need for community shelters in mobile home parks. After the event, several states, including South Carolina, considered legislation requiring new mobile home parks to include a storm shelter. The bill in South Carolina passed the House in 2009 but failed in the Senate. The mobile home industry opposed it, arguing that the cost would hurt affordability. The bill was reintroduced in 2011 and again in 2003. It never passed. As of 2024, South Carolina has no statewide requirement for storm shelters in mobile home parks. The tornado of March 15, 2008 remains a case study in the limits of warning technology. The forecast was perfect. The radar was accurate. The forecaster did everything right. But 9 people still died because the warning did not reach them, and because the structures they lived in could not protect them. The storm itself was not unusual. Tornadoes of EF3 intensity occur in the southeast every year. What made Lancaster different was the concentration of vulnerability. A mobile home park with no sirens, no shelter, and a population that was poor, elderly, and disconnected from the warning system. In the years since, Lancaster County has made improvements. The siren system now covers the entire county, including the mobile home park. The weather radio transmitter was installed in 2010. The community shelter is used regularly, but the underlying vulnerability remains. The residents of the park are still poor. Many still do not own weather radios. Many still do not have cars. Many still rely on their neighbors to warn them. The county has not conducted a follow-up study to see if the warning reception has improved. It is difficult to know if the lessons have been truly learned. One question that remains unanswered is whether the 9 deaths could have been prevented. The answer is likely yes. If the county had installed a siren near the park, the residents would have had at least 17 minutes to seek shelter. If the park had had a community shelter, they would have had a safe place to go. If they had had weather radios, they would have heard the warning directly, but none of those things existed. The root cause was not the tornado. It was the poverty that forced people to live in trailers and the government that chose not to protect them. The Lancaster tornado is a story about inequality. It is a story about the gap between the scientific capability to predict a disaster and the social infrastructure to survive it. The meteorologists did their job. The emergency managers did their job, but the system failed because it was not designed for the most vulnerable. That failure is not unique to Lancaster. It happens in every tornado that strikes a poor community. The Southeast is the deadliest tornado region in the country precisely because of this vulnerability. Until that changes, the losses will continue. The sky above Lancaster County is clear today. The sirens are tested every Wednesday at noon. The spotters are trained every spring. The forecasters watch the radar. They know they cannot stop the tornado. They can only warn, and the warning is only as good as the response it triggers. In Lancaster, that response is better than it was in 2008, but it is not perfect. It will never be perfect. The lesson of Lancaster is that in a world of imperfect systems, the people who suffer most are those with the fewest resources. That is a lesson that no warning can fix. In the months after the tornado, the name Mary Cooper appeared repeatedly in the local newspaper. She was 63 years old and had lived in the mobile home park for 11 years. On the afternoon of March 15th, she was watching television when the broadcast was interrupted by a crawl line warning of severe thunderstorms. She did not see the crawl line because she was watching a DVD. Her granddaughter later told investigators that Mary did not own a weather radio and had never heard of a tornado warning. She had no car. Her phone had been disconnected for non-payment. When the tornado struck, she sheltered in the bathtub with 3 of her grandchildren. The bathtub was the only room in the trailer without windows. It was the strongest part of the home, but the trailer was not anchored to a foundation. It lifted and flipped. Mary and the children were thrown into a neighbor's yard. None survived. The family of Mary Cooper filed a separate lawsuit in 2009, naming not only the county but also the manufacturer of the mobile home. They argued that the home's tie-down straps had been improperly installed and that the manufacturer knew the home would not survive an F2 tornado. The manufacturer argued that no mobile home is designed to withstand a tornado above F1 intensity. The case was settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. The terms of the settlement were sealed. The Cooper family received no acknowledgement of fault from the county or the manufacturer. The NWS recommendation to install a local weather radio transmitter was finally acted upon in 2010, but not without controversy. The county council debated the cost for over a year. The initial estimate was $14,000. The council voted to spend $6,000 of county funds and asked the state for the remainder. The state approved the request in December 2009, and the transmitter began operation in April 2010. It was mounted on a water tower on the outskirts of Lancaster. Coverage tests later showed that 93% of the county could receive the signal. The mobile home park was within the coverage area. Residents who purchased weather radios after the tornado reported that they could now hear warnings clearly. But as of 2011, only 8 of the 62 rebuilt homes in the park owned a weather radio. The county did not fund a distribution program. The impact-based warning system that the NWS began developing after Lancaster was first tested during the 2012 tornado season. In April 2012, a supercell thunderstorm moved through Lancaster County. The forecaster at the Columbia NWS office issued a warning that read, "This is a particularly dangerous situation. You are in the path of a confirmed tornado. Move to a sturdy shelter immediately. If you are in a mobile home, get out now and go to a community shelter or a low-lying area." The warning was issued 18 minutes before the storm reached the park. That day, 52 residents moved into the community shelter that had opened the same month. No one was killed. The tornado that day was weaker, an F1, but the test showed that the new language could trigger action. The question that still hangs over Lancaster is whether the 9 deaths in 2008 could have been prevented by any single change. The answer is not simple. If the siren had been installed, it would have warned people who were outside or near an open window. It would not have helped Mary Cooper in her sealed trailer. If the weather radio transmitter had existed, she would have needed to own a radio and have it turned on. If the community shelter had been built, she would have needed to hear the warning and have a way to get there. Each link in the chain was weak. The chain itself was not designed for people without cars, without credit, without family nearby. The legacy of the Lancaster tornado is not a dramatic story of engineering failure or negligence. It is the quiet, cumulative failure of systems that assume everyone lives the same way. The storm was not unusual. The poverty was not unusual. The response was not unusual. What was unusual was that for a few years, the failure was documented, studied, and remembered. Today, the mobile home park looks like any other. The shelter is locked except during warnings. The sirens test on Wednesdays. The weather radio transmitter broadcasts static until the next storm forms. And the families who lost someone carry the same kind of silence that fills a quiet radar screen on a clear sky.